Well, we are back after, I think it was a quite exciting presentation by the nice folks from PRINTSHOP. So welcome back to the next session here. And this time we are going to talk to one of my dear colleagues, Henrik, who is my business development manager here at INKISH, and he has a quite comprehensive background. So welcome to the show, Henrik.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Always welcome.
So yeah,
who are you?
Well, I joined INKISH almost a year ago now, and it has been quite exciting to be in this industry. Previously, I have worked in companies like Deloitte with consulting. I've been working in airline catering, and so I've seen the SARS several times, and now we have one similar event like this, unfortunately. But I've also been having had my own company for 5 years, and so I know the drill with the efficiency, with the sales, and then I've been teaching for, well, actually I just calculated in total 10 years as an external associate professor for Copenhagen Business School, and actually on full-time as well for 5 years. So I've been trying to teach different kinds of lessons, and I've learned, a lot from theory as well. And the interesting thing is that, when you teach, and most of you guys who have tried to have the course on marketing probably know the 4 Ps. And in theory, they mean price, product, place, and promotion. But, when you try it in real life and you discover that you're in front of a customer, the 4 Ps sometimes becomes please, 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 please buy my product. So
the problem is that when you just said what you just did, you can't count because you said please 6 times. So that is not so good for your repetition, I think, right?
But I'm a very pleasing person.
Okay, Henrik, before we move on to your presentation, I think that one of the things that is evident is that you have one thing in theory and another thing is daily operations. And I was actually rephrasing your name of the presentation a couple of times because we started discussing about having this just after talking to PRINTSHOP, because one thing is that you can calculate the prices. Another thing is that you can maybe even use artificial intelligence for having the right kind of understanding of where the market prices are. But it's also a fact that discounts are influencing your profit way more than most people probably think, right? And that was why I was thinking that it could be great to have a session talking about, how to get rid of margins easily, right?
Yeah, I think that, and sometimes, in sales process, we tend to get very focused on getting the sale, and there is sometimes situations where you bring home sales, which is perhaps not at the margin that you wanted to bring home. And I think that Kit and Casper shortly touched upon it, that to identify the jobs that you do which you don't make money from is actually very important. But if you were also able to, in your talk track, to make sure that you try to talk value with the customer instead of the price, and by that increasing your margin, or get away from talking about the price as such, that might be beneficial as well. So, but I think that AI and other systems, ways of collecting data, will probably make us much wiser in the future, because this is one area.
Way dumber, maybe.
Yes, but it's important that we ask the right questions, right?
Yeah, that's true. So, are you ready to take it away?
Yes, I am.
Then I will just leave it up to you and see if it works. Otherwise, you just shout help. I'm sitting next door, right?
Yes.
Great. Take it away, Henrik.
Thank you. And you should be seeing a presentation right now on your screen. So the first point here is the objective. The objective of having this short session is to talk a little bit about how not to destroy value. And this is, of course, an evergreen topic in all industry. no matter whether we talk restaurants, printers, or even technology sales. It is something that is really important to be aware of. And you know, I have probably, like you, most of you who are listening, also tried to do practical sales. I've tried to do the theoretical part as well. And in this little session, we will talk about how, from the printer's perspective, could we increase prices and increase so that we most likely price the value that we create. And we're watching everything from the printer's perspective. And just to make sure, you know, that not to disappoint my audience, but I don't have the magic equation for pricing, but I will, however, try to elaborate and come up with a couple of systematic points about the area. So what is the right price? Well, we will try to develop an understanding of economic value of customer, and also how to manage price pressure from different customers. So those are the three topics that I'll shortly touch upon. What is the right price? Well, the value to the customer is equal to the benefits the customer gets minus the sacrifices that they make. And benefits in this case could be all the positive things that we give to the customer, like fast response service, self-reporting on performance, quality assurance, and the sacrifices will be the price the customer pays, but also sort of perceived risk that the customer will have by entering into a relationship with us. So value is created from the core product plus what we can service around, wrap around the product of that core. A typical pricing practice that that Kit also talked upon is the full cost measure. And the full cost is a way to get your average costs plus a markup covered through the price. The purpose of this kind of pricing is that it's easy, of course, and it's, well, relatively easy, and it's to guarantee a margin on each job. However, it does tend to get a very internal focus because the equipment efficiency and other factors will be different from company to company. So there is actually a risk that with this sort of pricing, you can price yourself out of the market, or you can price yourself too low. And therefore, their idea about creating IA data about the customer's willingness to pay is something that we all dream about getting. If we knew what the customer was willing to pay, our life would be so much easier. So if we just take a brief model of a print shop, this is very rough numbers, but we have 3 times 30% costs and a profit of 10%. And this is not a totally far-fetched model, because we used the profit margin from the Danish medium-sized printers, who in the last 3 years have had an average of profit margin between 8 to 12% in their annual financial statements. That's why we took the 10%, which is also a very easy number to calculate with. So that is quite lucky. We will use this model to make a couple of illustrative examples, because if we look at this very, very simple example, we have a product with a sales price of 10, costs of 9, which gives us a profit per unit of 1. So this means that our total profit will be 100 on this job. If we look at the discount and we give a 2% discount, what would that mean in our case? Well, in this case, our new profit per unit would be 0.8, and our total profit would be 80. In order to be able to compensate for this kind of discount, we can actually calculate that we would have to sell additionally 25% to compensate. This is quite interesting, and of course, this is a constructed example. However, I think that sometimes when we go back and looking at our previous sales, we can probably find situations where it would have been nice to calculate this or to have this calculation in mind before we entered into an agreement. So the idea here is to give you the perception that even small discounts can actually matter, and actually it destroys profit much more than one would expect sometimes. And this is why, for instance, the previous lesson with the MIS system was actually quite interesting, because that could give us some of the data that we need, but also perhaps point to where we would look in the future. So if we give a discount and that happens, then at least let's make sure that we get a positive return on a discount. As we saw, a small discount in this constructed example would actually mean that we have to increase volumes substantially. This is not and this is important to remember when we enter into discounts. Another thing we could ask for is, of course, longer relationship time. We can do that via either long-term discounts or similar, or via long-term contracts. Then, of course, faster payment is also an important parameter. And last but not least, a discount should be seen and should be used in the customer relationship as a positive investment, which of course in time should yield a positive return, but also something that we should make the customer aware of. Another example, so in order to look at what does it actually take to compensate for discounts, and what does it actually mean when we talk about increasing, for instance, the quantity sold, we can see here in another example, and this is the same simple example that we have constructed, that if we increase the number of units sold, we would go from 100 to 110. The sales price would still be 10, cost 9. The profit would be 1. So in total, by an increase in volume by 10%, we would increase our profit by 10%. We could also have a look at the materials cost. Let's say we reduce the ink and substrates by 10%, just as an example, or the overhead by 10%. Both of them were 30% of the total cost. That would give us cost which is 8.7 and a higher profit per unit. In total, 30% increase in profit. But if we look at the same model and we're actually able to increase the price by 10%, all other things being equal, we would actually increase our sales price from 10 to 11, and costs would still be the same, and that would increase the total profit by 100%. I know that this is simple examples, but working with these ideas about how to do this may sometimes be something that it would be practical in real day life. So how can we work further with this? Well, in order to work with this, we could work with the value analysis. So these simple calculations are an illustration of how we could work with our offerings. Economic value is the maximum amount that a customer should be willing to pay. And assume that he or she is informed about the benefits of the product, the offerings of competitors, the higher value in the things that we talk about. Our first task is, of course, to try to establish what reference product are we talking about, and from there build on top with a differentiation value. So the value to the customers will be the reference value plus the differentiation value that we can provide. And differentiation could be customer service. It could be delivery time. For instance, the customer service could be all about how do we handle changes to orders, and there are more factors. How do we handle, the input for the order? Then, of course, delivery time. Can we deliver fast and hence reduce the customer's risk? Do we have a product range which will reduce the customer search cost and it also give us a better talk track? Do we have added value enhancement that would increase the value of the product we offer? And then, of course, all of our green offerings. Tomorrow we have sessions where we have people who will talk about legislation and the climate calculation, for instance. These green offerings are more and more important and should be included in our differentiation value as well, because they will, of course, shine back on the customer as well. In our using of the economic value to customer, it is important that we view this as a maximum price. And we try to determine this before we talk to our customers. This could be handled, for instance, via our systems or similar, but determining the economic value before negotiating with customer is important, because then you know what is the maximum price that this actually could get in the market, and how do we negotiate down from there. And the fact that customers are not buying your product itself is not necessarily a reason to cut your price. It may be because you have to change your marketing or your communication with the customer to justify the price. There are, several steps around this pricing that I'll just get into nextly, but there are also, the customers will have some sensitivity regarding price, and it's also important to handle this sensitivity when we talk about price. So in order to give you something operational to work with when we talk about economic value analysis, it is important to firstly identify the closest competitive product. You probably already know this. Then identify all the factors that differentiate the product, as we talked about, the service, the other differentiation factors like what makes the product more environmental friendly, and all the values that will be important to the customer. Once we determine this differentiation value, we can add this to the reference product, and then we can develop a value profile for each customer segment, depending, of course, on how many customer segments you have. But operationally, it should be possible to divide your customers into several segments and have differentiated prices for these several segments. And then, of course, it is important to develop a marketing program that educates customers about economic value. So once you have been through this exercise, you will have a pricing list. And of course, there will be pricing sensitivity. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is not necessarily the magic bullet for everything, or the magic equation, but it is to give you some food for thought to talk about prices. It is, of course, important to be aware of the substitutions. If there's a high price difference between this product and the perceived substitute, customers will be more sensitive to this, of course. If it's more difficult to compare, then customers will actually be less price sensitive, which is actually interesting, because then it's if they add on the differentiation value, and it's more difficult to compare to other competitors. Customers are also less price sensitive if there's a high switching cost. So, and then least but not last, there's the fairness effect. that customers are more sensitive when prices seems unfair. This is a perception that can be very difficult to handle in a sale because fairness can be a very subjective opinion. But these are the four main sensitivity factors that you can take into consideration when talking to your customers. So the idea of this lesson was to give you some tools for trying to calculate or promote your differentiation value, and also make sure, or at least take it into consideration when you price in order to capture the value that you have created for the customer. So thank you for your attention, and I would love to go to some questions if there are any.
I think I want to say thank you very much, Henrik, for a very great presentation. You know, it's always like when we talk about all the different things that we see in the market, is like how can you learn from your experience, right? Selling stuff. One of the things that you didn't mention so much about in this presentation is the lead-in time and the length of a selling cycle. I think that most of us are constantly challenged by the fact that sometimes it takes a very long time to promote and present and get through to the customer, and that is maybe one of the reasons why we also tend to sometimes use discounts as a method to get into a new customer relationship, which I, on the other hand, think may be difficult to get out of again. We have only got one question so far. I have some other questions as well, but Robert, he is asking here, should a discount be considered a loss leader only? What is your opinion about that?
I think that you can also view discount as an investment in a customer relation, but I think it's important that you go into this discount discussion with open eyes, because there is a tendency that once you have given a discount, it tends to be forever, or expected to last forever. And actually, customers don't seem to value discounts necessarily, because if they just think that this was because you had charged a too high price eventually, or there's a risk that if you give too high discounts, that the customers will look at your product as less valuable. So I think that of course you can look at discounts in several ways, and I offered some perspectives, but I agree that it can be used as an investment into a customer relationship. And especially if you are starting a customer relationship, this could be one way to get in. Mm-hmm. For instance, you can use the discount to reduce the customer switching cost.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, because I think that, at least from my perspective, I think that one of the bigger challenges in the printing industry is that we have a lot of product that are seen as commodity products, where it's very difficult to see the differentiation between vendors, because basically if you order a 16 pages 130 GSM coated paper 4+4, it's essentially the same product you get. So, and that is of course why you also mentioned these differentiation kind of things that is very important to think of, right? But when you, I mean, because if you look at customers, this what you have been talking about is, from at least my perspective, more how a printer should see on it. Because I think that customers today, when you go to almost anything you buy, from a car to maybe even a printing machine, maybe even your daily groceries, it's discounts, rebates that is flashing all over. Does that mean that you simply just have to have a higher pricing point from the beginning in order to give a discount, or because it's a discount is also like a mental thing, right?
Yeah, well, discounts works in two ways mentally, right? If a product is discounted too high, right, we sometimes tend to either think that the product is not very valuable, or we distrust the original price. We probably all know the experience from the supermarket saying, oh, 70% discounts this week. And then I'm thinking, yeah, you increased the price by 60% and then you give me 70% discount. That is something that creates distrust instead, for instance. But I think that that discounts signal something about your product, and it's important to perhaps avoid that talk unless you have something which is very concrete, like, for instance, investment in a new relationship or a continued relationship, or try to weed out the shoppers. I mean, we all want to weed out the shoppers in our customer segments, right, or portfolio. We all know the customers who buy only occasionally and they always negotiate price, and the total cost of handling a customer like that in the long run will be significantly higher than the profit we'll ever make from a customer like that, perhaps.
But is it at all possible to market a commodity product out of the price question, in your opinion?
I think so. I mean, it all depends on what is the perceived value and of a product. And I'm thinking that if you can try to add features, then of course the look and feel of a product can become, you know, more exclusive, for instance, if that's the if that's the branding the customer wants.
But that is like moving the product from a commodity to a specialty, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I have a question from Robert again. He's saying, because we were talking about these, he was the one that asked if discounts can be considered as loss leader only. And then he continues, do you mean like a loyalty discount based on volume of orders? And then he continues as a follow-up to that one. That's why discounts can be given to your best customers. They earn their preferential price points.
I think one of the important things that you can that should know about your customers is to divide them into high cost to serve and low cost to serve customers, and then high volume and low volume. This is a very simple way of dividing them, but an idea to get the customer to place more of their wallet in your business is, of course, to give them long-term incentives. Then you reduce your costs to have the customer, and you also increase the volume in the long run. So, of course, in that respect, to create long-term relations, discounts can be an effective mean as well.
Well, Henrik, as usual, it's a pleasure working with you, and it's a pleasure to listen to you. And for sure, your experience from being a teacher came through in this session, in my opinion. I hope that everybody enjoyed this session as well. And so thank you very much. Just to let everybody know, Henrik is online, so we can keep chatting with him if you like to. And then we will put in a little break, because in 15 minutes we have our session with Andreas Weber from INKISH Germany. He's going to give you a very good presentation about social media. And I think you can learn from him. So again, Henrik, thank you very much, and I hope that everybody enjoyed your session. I hope that everybody will stay put even for a lunch break, just to enjoy Andreas when he will be with us in a short time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.